at 1 o'clock. Thank you. I will start. Okay, great. So good afternoon and welcome to our workshop on urban citizen science and community-based knowledge production. My name is Dr. Saffron Woodcraft and I'm a research fellow at UCL's Institute for Global Prosperity. Co-chairing this session with my colleagues, Mariam Deha from the Center for Lebanese Studies and Dr. Nikolai Minchev, research fellow at the Relief Center, which is based at the Institute for Global Prosperity. Before I welcome our speakers, I'm going to say a few words about the purpose and the format of this session. So the topic we're exploring is urban citizen science and community-based knowledge production. Our starting point for this discussion is thinking about cities as spaces that are diverse and complex and where social structures and the built environment are constituted. So in this context, we are interested in exploring the space for diverse and context-specific forms of knowledge and local capacities to play a central role in how we understand urban needs and how we go about solving spatial and social challenges. So today, what we want to do is explore the value of citizen science, urban citizen science, as a participatory methodology, where residents take an active role in research and in data analysis, and/or the design of interventions that are seeking to address specific urban challenges. So our goal for today is to learn from citizen science initiatives across a wide range of different contexts. So we're running today's session as an interactive discussion. Our contributors, who I will introduce in a moment, have prepared short papers and videos, which are available to view on the DSA conference website. I hope that you've had an opportunity to view them in advance. So what we will be doing is discussing some of the common themes and issues that are emerging from these papers. So to our audience, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us. If you'd like to put questions to any of our speakers as the discussion unfolds, then please post your comments in the chat. And finally, to those who've just joined us, a reminder that this session is being recorded. So please let me give a brief introduction to our contributors and offer some reflections on the papers that they've prepared before we move right into the discussion. So first, let me welcome Dr. Alexandra Albert, who's a senior research fellow at University College London, where she's working on the co-production and citizen science theme of an interdisciplinary project called Act Early. So this project focuses on early life interventions to improve the health and opportunities of children who are living in poverty in urban areas in the UK. So Dr. Albert's paper is looking at the use of creative participatory methods and how they've been used in Act Early to engage people's imaginations and reflects on the importance of those reflective practices and learning cycles to the project. Second, I would like to introduce Dr. Oscar Garza Vázquez from the Universidad de las Americas in Puebla and his colleague, Professor Matías Navel, Universidad Popular Autónoma del Estado de Puebla. And they together have shared with us a fascinating paper on a 3-year research project that's brought together over 50 scholars who have been working to develop a modern understanding of the common good. So we'll be looking at drawing out the idea of citizen science as a practice of urban commoning from that paper. So next, I would like to welcome Ying Wang from UCL's Institute for Global Prosperity, whose paper offers a really nuanced account of citizen participation in 2 projects focused on the monitoring of marine plastic pollutions in China. And then finally, I'd like to welcome Dr. Adriana Maceda from De Montfort University, and her colleagues, Can Ozadem and Norkagio Onyanokpuro, whose paper examined the citizen-led co-design of an urban garden project. So this project is in a highly diverse but very deprived part of Leicester, which is a UK city. And their paper looks at how this project was very much community-led. So citizen-led, NGO-led, with a team of academic researchers supporting that project to think about skills enhancement and employment opportunities, as well as knowledge co-production. So just to kick off the discussion, I'm just going to provide some very high-level reflections on these papers and suggest that we start with two questions that I will put to our guests. So first of all, these are four really different and very stimulating contributions, both in terms of the projects and contexts and approaches that our contributors are addressing. So we're looking at contributions where we've got residents in urban communities taking a very active role in co-producing research and knowledge and spatial interventions. But then as a counterpoint, a really interesting case that takes a more theoretical approach to knowledge co-production as part of a wider set of common goods. So while these are diverse papers in terms of their approaches and contexts, we felt that there are several common issues running through the contributions, and I want to just pull out two to kick off our conversation. And the first of these is empowerment. So the contributions from Alexandra and Alessandra and Ying all engage with citizen science as a form of radical empowerment, empowerment of individuals and local communities, as much as a participatory method of research and knowledge production. So for us, this raises a question about who's learning from who, and how the lessons from this kind of dynamic relationship, this dynamic learning, are then captured and fed back into the science of urban citizen science. So what I'm thinking about here is the project that Alessandra and her colleagues discuss that is citizen-led, where we have academic researchers responding to what community stakeholders are asking them to do. And Ying's NGO cases, where you have citizen and NGO-led projects, but academic researchers are kind of absent from that picture. So for me, these papers raise an important points about how we understand the process and the practice and the lived experiences of citizen science, and then how lived experience connects to empowerment and impact. But critically, I think it prompts us to think about who's recording the learning and the reflections from these processes and practices. So the subjective experiences, the changes in behavior that take place, the failures, the realities of motivations for being involved or staying involved. Who's capturing those dimensions as opposed to just focusing on the research findings? So the question that I want to kind of put to the group here is, who's learning from who? How do we, who's learning from who? And how are the lessons from this kind of dynamic learning fed back into the science of urban citizen science? So that's the first set of reflections. Very short other set of reflections before we get into the discussion. So then the second theme that we thought ran through all of the papers is the issue of individual agency and autonomy. So Alessandra, and Ying, their contributions offer empirical cases of citizen science empowering people and flattening hierarchies of power. Whereas Oscar and Matthias's contribution offers a really interesting theoretical perspective, which is discussing agency as a driver of human development and knowledge as a common good. So here we wanted to invite you as our contributors to kind of reflect on the idea of citizen science as a practice of knowledge commoning. And on this topic, think about who gets to define the common good, who gets to define what is a good life, and how conflicting visions of the common good are managed. So empirically, in the projects that you are researching and engaged in, Ying and Alessandra and Alexandra, and then theoretically, Oscar and Matthias, how do you engage with this question of kind of conflict in relation to the theory of the common good in your work? So I'm going to suggest that we kick off the conversation by going back perhaps to this first question about who's learning from who, and how the lessons from this kind of dynamic learning are fed back into the science of urban citizen science. Before I invite you to give your responses, Nikolai and Mariam, is there anything else you wanted to add to those reflections? Anything I might have missed before we get started?
From my perspective, sounds good to me. I think we should get to the discussion.
Okay, good. So Alexandra, can I invite, oh, sorry, Mariam.
Agreed.
Okay. Alexandra, perhaps I could go to you first and invite your kind of reflections and comments on this first question about who's learning from who, and how do we capture the lessons from that dynamic learning?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for the introduction and for these really interesting questions. I think it's very relevant in the project that I was talking about in my contribution, which was, so I work at UCL, I'm an academic researcher, but I was working with a team of community researchers that were managed by a health partnership and pioneering charity in Tower Hamlets called the Bromley by Bow Centre. I found that I was learning an awful lot from them as the community research team. So the team was kind of managed, by the Bromley by Bow Centre, but the community researchers were residents in the borough of Tower Hamlets. And one of the things that we tried to do from the outset was to kind of build in a sort of time, space, dedicated to reflect on our process and to have really open discussions about what was working and, most importantly, what wasn't working. And I think, that was one of the most kind of important things, was to have that time, dedicated time. So we had weekly team meetings, and this was the whole work that the community research team did was actually taking place during the pandemic. So we were meeting regularly online and just having very open discussions because, lots of things we had to completely adapt and change our methods and approaches. And I felt like we were learning a lot from each other. So I was learning about what kind of methods worked and didn't work, contrary maybe to some of my previous assumptions in terms of like doing academic research. And then hopefully I was able to support the community research team to discuss kind of ethics issues. I think a big, that was a big discussion, but also to kind of have fun and to get to know each other and to bring some kind of energy to it as well. That would be my initial reaction, but it was a process of kind of working it out together, and so I felt like the learning was very much two-way.
That's great. Thank you very much. Adriana, could I invite you to give your reflections next? And I do apologize, I was introducing you incorrectly earlier. I've got a really close colleague called Alessandra, and my COVID brain was getting confused. So please accept my apologies.
No problem. I thought you had introduced me correctly. I was impressed at your pronunciation of my surname, which was very close to the Sardinian original, which is unusual. It is a good question. We are a complex body of learners in a way, because we are a community and a university group, but both groups have students involved. So as a general, like my first reaction was, well, I think it's mostly us, the university group, learning from the community as we accompany them in a process that they are leading. I want to believe that we are also contributing to the process, but probably in terms of learning, we learned from so many angles that we're probably learning from them more. But then if you look at both of what the us means or what the them means, within our group, we also have students who are learning as students, because this involved a competition and a sub-design exercising studio. And for them, they also have students and young people. So I guess there are different groups learning more or less, or perhaps learning from like in different fronts and in different formats simultaneously. We are contributing with information, for example, when it comes to the environmental past of the area. That's something that could say residents are learning from the university group, but I think that the university group are learning by seeing them do. And again, when it comes to the recording, yes, perhaps we are recording everything, but certainly the NGOs are recording how the young people learn. So sorry, it's a bit of a long response, but I think that there's a very interesting and complex set of cross-learning processes.
No, that's a great and very concise account for such a complex set and dynamic set of relationships. Thank you. Ying, I wonder if we could go to you and invite your reflections on this question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think because my research is also about plastics pollution. And one problem about plastic pollution is that the old wisdom cannot solve this problem. Because I also went to the communities, like very traditional type community, ask them, what are your traditional way to deal with the wastes as the plastics? And then they say that we just leave them on the wild land, or just leave them there, or just burn them. But because of the plastic, now they have plastics in their waste. So actually this traditional way cannot deal with this problem. So actually they need like scientific contribution like this, like new technology to deal with these new materials. Or and another example is that in a monitoring project, they need a protocol to follow how to monitor the plastics, like the sampling strategies, and how to select the site for monitoring, and also this protocol. So for this part of it, definitely they need the scientific contribution to this. We can say that, like, to learn from the scientists. But for another aspect of the story is that these things, they are all tools. So the NGO staffs, they need to go to the community and to learn from the residents and how to use those tools. And so it's like the application of the science. So they need to discuss with the local community, like what tools do you think are more the best match your situations, and what protocol you think you can follow up. And because we also needed to think about the practical issue, like the time, and because people always do this like voluntarily. So need to think about the time they contributed to this project to discuss with them. And they also gave me an example, like they never thought about like transfer the plastics from the beach and actually to the waste facilities can be a problem in some communities because of the long distance and from the beach and to the waste facilities they have in the community. And so now actually they just use human labors to take it from the beach. And then so they're thinking about like provide new vehicles for them, and the vehicles actually can move on the beach, and for them, yeah, to carry the plastics. And another thing I think may be relevant to this topic is that, yeah, it is true that in all the projects I saw, actually the scholars, they're absent from the project design. But I also asked the NGOs, where actually did you get all the information about how to do the monitoring? But this protocol, where did you get it? And they say, actually, I find there's a global network. And also there's a national network, they share this information. For the global network, of course, there are some like international institutions did the research previously. And so that they just borrow ideas from them, or just get the toolkits from them, because there are a lot of institutions are doing this kind of research to develop the toolkits for communities or like NGOs who want to do the monitoring activities. So actually they get the knowledge from it. So I think it's like, first of all, the network is very important. It's a platform for accumulating the knowledge. And secondly, I think definitely they learn from both, especially for the application of the tools.
Ying, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Matthias, I wonder if I could go to you now and invite you to reflect, because your kind of entry point to this work is quite different to the cases that we've discussed so far. So I'm really intrigued to hear from you and from Oscar on your reflections and how you engage with the question of empowerment and with learning.
Oscar, do you want to start? Do you want me to start? Please
if you want, go ahead, and then
okay.
I can complement with the work that we are doing also in the communities. Right.
So I would start with a simple reminder of Foucault's very deep understanding of statistic. Statistic is a science that is born with the state. The state needs statistics to govern. And in fact, we have in Mexico very good statistics. That's one of the good things we have, but not at the level of municipalities. At the level of municipalities, there is a lack of statistic, and especially statistic relevant to the term of elected officials. So we have statistic when we have statistic only on a 5 ever 10 years periods at the level of municipalities. But then you have municipalities with over 1 or 2 million persons in Mexico, and municipalities with about 2,000 people living in the municipality. So you have very wide, different array of municipalities. How do you govern a city of 1 million inhabitants if you lack actually statistic? That's a big question. So our empowerment, or the way we empower those municipalities is by providing them new kind of statistic and data. Those data are created not to mirror individual achievements, but actually group achievements, or not even achievements, that is commons we achieve together. And we propose to understand actually a city, a community, a municipality has a system of commons, of different commons. And we are interested in the way those commons are integrated in the sense that how do they build up as a system, and obviously in which direction does the whole system of commons move? Is it integrating or disintegrating? And obviously a disintegrating system of commons is a system actually that goes nowhere, that goes toward chaos, or anomia, as Durkheim would have it. So who is learning from who? Knowledge, So, well, obviously we propose actually a methodology, but the application of the methodology through an instrument we have developed over time is about people answering what they understand as being not their feeling, their perspective, but what goes on the ground. So how do they perceive actually the existence of commons in the village or in the municipality? And so we have some sort of individual perspective of group realities, and through this we propose then a sort of methodology to calculate, to aggregate those data, and give what we think a fair comprehension of a system of common good. So this is what we feed then to deciders, and on which they can then build up public policies. We have applied this to now indigenous communities. Oscar can tell a lot more about this. Urban communities, peri-urban municipalities, and we hope to apply it to a city, the city of Puebla of 1.5 million inhabitants. Oscar, any other points?
Yes, if I may add very, very quick. But I think, as Matthias was saying, like what we are trying to do is to propose how we can understand realities in a different way, but at the same time, trying to adapt this methodology to different realities. For example, in the application to indigenous communities, We were in constant discussion with local people from these communities, because municipalities are not only big, but they are also extremely diverse within the municipalities, that they can be its own country, if you like, in terms of diversity. In one of the indigenous communities in which we are at the moment working and applying the common good approach that we are proposing, they speak 3 different indigenous languages. And we translated the questionnaire to 2 of them, who were the majority of the population. We couldn't afford to do the 3 because access to different areas was very difficult. But in relation to the question that you prompted about who learns from who, I think there is no doubt that this is a mutual enrichment, because for them to go through the questionnaire and making suggestions, it definitely makes them think about their own reality from a different perspective, through which probably they no longer look at it from this perspective. So they were conscious about how important this was for their life, how enriching their life was through these commons and these collective practices, which is what we try to capture. But definitely from our point of view, it was extremely enriching to learn from these very diverse realities at the same time. Even languages is already a different way of knowing and learning about the world. And it was, I think we can say that the learning and the enrichment goes as in 2 different directions.
Thank you very much. I'm only frustrated that we have so little time, because this could be such an interesting conversation that could go off in lots of different directions. And I think, Oscar and Matthias, the work that you've just described has a lot of parallels with work that Hannah and Nikolai and Mariam and I have been working on in different contexts, trying to bring kind of lived realities into models that can be translated into statistical data collection. So I wonder if we could explore that offline so we can pick that up. I'm going to hand over to Nikolai now to contribute to the conversation, and then perhaps we can, in the last 10 minutes, move on to the second question that we raised, unless there are other questions within the group that people would like to pursue. Nikolai.
Thank you. Did everyone have a chance to respond? Sorry, my brain is a bit slow as well today. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, my question is, I suppose, a bit of a philosophical question. And it's really about what is it that makes academic research academic, if anything. So, you know, we're in a session about participatory research, and all of us, I suppose, in one way or another, are kind of committed in a sense, deparochializing the university, in making sure that research isn't just the remit of highly trained, specialized academics who have had to go through years and years of training of doing research. You know, we want to open up the practice of research to the wider community, and we want to create connections between universities and citizens. So, in a sense, we're kind of trying to undermine that distinction between the academy and well, everything that's outside of it. But at the same time, you know, all of us here, I assume, work, or as far as I know, work at the university. And I'm just wondering on what people's reflections are about not really the role of university, but the nature of academic research. What is it that makes research academic, if anything?
That's a fantastic question, Nikolai. Thank you very much. Who would like to respond to that first of all? Let me see, looking around the room. Alex has got a smile on her face, so perhaps I will invite Alex to kick off the conversation.
Thanks. I'm just enjoying the question. It's a great question. Yeah, I guess I think about this quite a lot. It's kind of, what makes it different? I guess there's certain standards or certain kind of procedural things that we would have to follow, that kind of make the academic, I guess, around rigor and kind of systems and processes. But I think there's also a really important duty for academic researchers within that to kind of continue to reflect on those processes and to continue to be kind of open and flexible to kind of adapting them to new contexts or new situations, and having the opportunity to kind of step back and reflect on the processes. I'm not sure if that's exactly answering the question, but that would be my immediate response. But I don't know if others have.
Great, thank you. Matthias, can I invite you to come in?
Yes, I like the question, Nikolai. I think it's the usual malaise in French, the malaise of intellectuals regarding being intellectuals toward the rest of the world. Actually, I think this is quite understandable, but it's also quite, I don't think it's quite important. You need knowledge, you need to have accumulated knowledge to be able to actually help other people. Stupid people helping stupid people usually doesn't work very well. So the terms are very strong, and I would just say that you need people who have accumulated knowledge, who have a critical knowledge, actually to make a difference on the field of development. Participatory methodology are not something new. We have applied them for 30, 35 years now, and we know where they work and why they don't work. We know also that fully and totally participatory, totally open methodology don't work. And if you just ask people on the ground, what would you like to change on your life, you get a whole diverse set of answers that usually don't help a lot to solve local and real urgent problems. So what make academic? Well, there is the whole field of epistemological thought and philosophy. And I think I would rather ask, what is the ground of your question? Is it a malaise, a personal malaise, or is it an epistemological question? If it is an epistemological question, how do we know what we know? Then it's a whole. There is a whole. We have 2,000 years of reflection on that. So I don't know exactly why this should be an interesting question, sincerely.
Well, the reason why I think it's an interesting question and the ground for my question is that I'm not very convinced that the distinction is as strong as we often make it out to be. So, for example, this notion of accumulation of knowledge. I mean, I see no reason why citizens don't have critical knowledge or don't accumulate knowledge in the same way. So I'm just, I suppose,
citizens accumulate knowledge in culture, in the way people and the whole world of people understand the reality, Nikolai. This is quite clear, and there is critical dimension in it too. But actually, the way universities accumulate knowledge is different. It's a different set of methodology. What's wrong with that? Nothing. You have different sort of critical thinking arising in different forms. I think it's about universities. It's about the way universities accumulate and enhance knowledge, create knowledge.
Yeah, and the other thing before we go to Mariam is that I just wanted to say that I see research as basically a form of sustained and rigorous inquiry, and I really don't see no reason why people outside of the university cannot do this, and why anyone.
I'm not saying
really
this.
any
I'm
human
not saying
being,
this, but they
you
do
know,
not do it with the
should
same
not
sort
be
of
doing this in their
methodologies.
daily life outside of academia. But anyways, I'll hand over to Mariam because I think
that's privilege. I'm going to just this is a really interesting conversation that could go on for a long time. And you know, it does speak to a lot of the big issues here, which are about the arbitrary distinctions that are often made, and how they are kind of enforced through different power structures. So I want here to first, we've only got 6 minutes left. So I'd like first to invite Mariam to give her reflections, and then Adriana, and then Oscar, please.
I'll be brief, but it is on the point that was discussed. And the question that I wrote was, how do we define or redefine the role of a researcher in these evolving new methodologies that are appearing? And I think a main distinction that popped for me is that sometimes citizen science and knowledge exchange is used in a small part of the research, specifically to get field work, specific information, specific data. And in other places, and I think this is what Nikolai was referring to with the sustained citizen science methodology, the participatory research has become a main output from the research itself. And it's almost like the methodology itself is the purpose of the research. And then the subjects and the final impact get formed around it. And this is kind of what we're doing in our work with citizen science in Lebanon. And I think this is mainly the difference where on one hand, a researcher can define a subject and then create a methodology for it. On the other hand, the purpose is the methodology and the effect of it. And then based on that, we define what we want to work on. So I'll end it here.
Thank you, Mariam. Adriana?
To start by the end, I wanted to respond to Matthias' question, why Nikolai's question is important. I believe that it's crucial actually, because there has been traditionally a matter of hierarchy, right, between intellectuals and non-intellectuals or normal people or citizens or however we call it. And it's time probably to start questioning this hierarchy. If different ways of knowledge and knowledge accumulation are different, is one of them better than the others? Is one of them superior? And this is even more important when we are decolonizing knowledge so strongly or intending so strongly to do it. I'm not in development studies, I'm an architect, as you know, so I'm looking at the field from outside, but in fields like anthropology or development, I believe that these questions of hierarchy regarding knowledge and the role of the researcher have been fundamental. I think it's really important. Matthias, you made a contrast between criticality and stupidity, or knowledge accumulation and the lack of it. And like others said, I don't think that maps linearly with the role of researchers and universities. There's a bit of multiple attitudes both inside and outside university. And if I think of our group, which was like my first reaction to the question, I've been or reflecting on this, and it's probably a matter of emphasis, at least in the case of the project I shared with you. Because we are all being critical and systematic and trying to question things and trying to contribute to solving real life problems. But I believe that the NGOs, the volunteers, the people on the ground are focusing on being there and resolving the problem. While probably if there's a split of roles, to call it somehow, our group is more focused on the self-reflection and the writing about it or recording about it, although we also intend to solve real life projects, and they are also self-reflecting. The very fact that our NGO partners can't be here with us today, even though we did invite them, they are just too busy on the ground to be here. So that is part of it. Or one of our collaborators, Chan, cannot be here today because he's now working in an architectural practice. So who pays for your salary, who pays for your bills, what your livelihood is, what your commitments are part of the story. In short, in our group, I believe it's a matter of emphasis and who has more time and who is paid to invest more time in what task.
Thank you very much, Adriana. we only have 1 minute left efficiently, so I'm going to invite Oscar to reflect very quickly.
Well,
I'm sure we could go over by a couple of minutes if people are willing to stay on. So Oscar, to you, please.
yes, I will try to be very brief, but I think there are different ways in which you can understand the question. And I think the way Matthias was understanding the question was on questioning whether there is a role for the academic as such, and whether we should try to behave in such a way that is undistinguishable from society. But I think, as both Adriana and Mariam were saying, and I think trying to find a middle ground, is that we can see knowledge as precisely as a commons, which means something that we produce together. But that doesn't englobe everything, because, as we suggest, it's not only about who does what, but also about how we organize to produce it and how we govern the production of knowledge, for example. And I think in this production of knowledge and in this organization of knowledge, there are roles for the academic being academic, and there is a role for society being a participant of this co-production of knowledge. And I think this can be a middle ground between the different perspectives, which is precisely making reference as understanding knowledge as a common in itself, something that we do together and we benefit and enjoy together at the same time.
Matthias, would you like to come in very briefly before we wrap up?
Just I totally agree with what Oscar just said, and I would add that knowledge has a common is not is obviously fraught with the power plays, and there is where obviously the position of who speak to whom and who is dominant in a society over whom becomes relevant. But power plays doesn't mean that they can't be resolved, and obviously this means a sort of approach of reality. But the idea of knowledge being a common, I think, is precisely where I would settle the question.
So unfortunately, we've come to the end of our session. So thank you all for participating. I'm sorry that we haven't had more time to go into these questions in more depth. There's a lot that we could learn from all of the different perspectives here. So on behalf of the co-conveners, I just want to say thank you. Thank you very much to our contributors. And I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and that we can perhaps pick up some of these threads outside of this session. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great conversation. See
Thank
you soon.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.